first question I'd like to ask you is, how important would you say the sound engineer's job in TV is today compared to, say, the earlier days?
Well, it's at least as important, and more important in the sense that the viewer, listener has a higher expectation of sound quality now than they did in the 50s and 60s. Everyone's familiar with hi-fi sound, or up close to hi-fi sound, with their Walkmans and their sound systems and TVs. That wasn't the case in the 50s and 60s. Sound quality tended to be poor, the equipment was poor, the technology wasn't good. So everyone expects a very high standard of sound these days compared to what was expected back in the earlier days.
I don't think the importance of the role has changed that much, but certainly the technical challenges and with regard to technology and things like that has certainly changed. Obviously, I wouldn't have been around in the early days, but I'd imagine definitely things have progressed a lot since then. But I don't think the importance of the role has changed. It's still, obviously, television is sound and picture. Sound being 50% of the equation, I would say. Maybe even more so, I don't know.
Yeah, I suppose the job at the end of the day is you're still there to provide TV sound, in our case anyway, to the best of your ability anyway, and to get that message across to the viewer at home. Differences, obviously technology has changed and so on, but the actual role itself, I don't know if it's changed a huge amount. I mean, you're still there at the end of the day trying to provide the best sound quality for the viewer at home.
How do you think the sound engineer's job in TV today has changed over the years in regard to the transition from analog to digital?
I suppose the biggest change is the amount of equipment that's involved. So back in the day, what we now record in a computer like this, you need a tape machine the size of a fridge or the size of a couple of fridges to record even 16 tracks or 24 tracks. Now you can record hundreds just inside a computer, inside a laptop even. So that's a big difference in terms of the studio, the amount of equipment.
The change from analog to digital for television over the years has been big steps, because like recording like on analog, although it was a good process, it worked and stuff like that, but it was quite time-consuming compared to the kind of digital sound today, because like you put a card into a camera now and the sound links into the camera, and the sound and the visuals are all on one card. It's all on digital information. Whereas before, like with the analog sound, say reel-to-reel tape, you know, and even that machine, which was a digital format as well, the steps to what we know today, it's all on the one card, so it's there, it's practically already synced up. Whereas before with the analog sound, the tape sound, it had to be synced up on big machines like a Steinbeck machine with film and stuff like that. And then like if you do an edit, for example, like on the analog sound, you literally had to like cut the tape, splice the tape and rejoin it up. Like a one edit on tape could have taken, like, for the simplest of edit, can take up to like, you know, anything 10, 15 minutes. Whereas digital now, it's only a click of a mouse, you know, at each end of where your out point is and your in point is. So it's a far easier process now. It's not a thing, it's like, the comparison of the sound to me was always like, I liked the analog sound because it was a more meatier sound. It was more kind of like, you could really feel the sound, but you had a lot of tape noise as well to deal with. So you had to use like a lot of compressors and all of that to try and eradicate any of the tape noise. Whereas now, like, you know, with the digital, it's just, an edit can be done like in seconds, you know. That's the difference. It was the time factor, you know.
I think the sound engineer's job, as far as what they're expected to do as part of the production, is probably the same, but how that job is executed has changed quite a lot. I mean, obviously there are huge technological advances, and one aspect of it that's, I suppose, not part of the day-to-day job is how much you have to stay on top of those advances. particularly because you're frequently making programs for an international market, and if international standards are changing, you can't remain in a bubble here. You have to always keep an ear to the ground as to what's happening in the industry at large. From the point of view of execution, I suppose there's a lot more convenience in certain aspects of digital desk. There's memories and things.
Absolutely, yeah. With the advancement of digital, like, I mean, things have become, I suppose, the footprint of things has become a lot smaller. You can do a lot more with a lot less equipment. There's more stuff built in. You've got much more powerful DSP. You're able to process many more channels in a much smaller footprint. Whereas back in the days of analog, if you needed 96 channels, you had 96 faders on your desk. The desks were huge. When it comes to live sound and PA and fallback and things like that, it's fantastic having digital consoles now these days as well. You can be, like I said, much more precise. You've got recall, you've got memories, you've got it's just, I think it's made things a lot easier. But obviously, to get familiar with all of that, there's a lot more kind of knowledge required, and you need to put in a bit more time, I think, into learning the equipment. But the benefits you can get out of it, you can get so much more out of it the more you put in.
I think the time aspect is a key thing as well. I mean, for visiting artists coming in, for example, they could arrive with, say, 5-6 stems of music for an audio track, and just to hand that to us on a key effectively, us load it up, and straight away we have it instantaneously, compared to years ago as well, where you'd actually putting them in one by one and actually trying to sync them up then on a timeline as well. I think that the speed aspect is a real advantage as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just the way that we can share information and knowledge between each other so quickly. And hence, as the guys were saying, that's why I think it's important that we have to stay on top of the current technology that's out there, because if not, you're left behind, really.
Absolutely.
If you don't stay with
when it comes to things like back in the old days, playing grams off 1/4-inch tape or whatever, having to line all of that up, and these days with the simple computer program that you load all your sounds that you need into, and you can just cue them with a touch screen or whatever, and it's just so much more effective, and you can achieve so much more. And whereas you could certainly achieve the same things, broadly speaking, with tape, but a huge amount more effort would have gone into it, and much more equipment would have been needed. Whereas now you can do all of that on a laptop,
Take, for example, tape machine here. It was a machine that was like at the forefront of all location sound recording for film and television. Tape machine, a Nagra. These are actually a great machine. But this is what you have here. This is a reel-to-reel, and would work. That your sound, you're obviously rolling when you get your sound and stuff. But depending on the speed, it's back to the signal to noise ratio situation. Depending on the speed, the faster you go with the tape, the less tape noise. Because the tape noise, you get noise off the tape, background noise off the tape. And the faster you go, that becomes less. So this, I would have ran this, there's 15 IPS. 15 IPS is inches per second. So there's 15 inches goes by every second past the head here that was recording the sound. Now on this reel, if you can imagine, I would have gotten 7.5 minutes out of each reel. So every 7.5 minutes, I had to call reload, sound reload. And that would have taken me up to, because when I put the tape on, I would have had to put an identification on the top, at the head of the tape, with a tone for calibration in the studio, for general information for the editor. Information is paramount to any editor from a location crew filming, because then he can kind of think on the same mindset that the sound recorders was, and all the information is there. And that would have, to reload this on any production at the time, would have taken me anything up to 10 minutes to do. So a whole crew is standing around waiting for me to reload this. And that was after every 7.5 minutes. Now you could get a machine with a bigger tape. It was a dearer machine and stuff. But every 7.5 minutes I had to reload. And that if you work out from a day, is a lot of time to any production. And again, the meter is rolling because it's budget driven. But now, when the DAT tape machine come along, which is the next one after this, onto the road of digital, it was still a tape format, but the tapes on the DAT tapes were up to an hour. I could get up to an hour. And that was like, I can't believe this is brilliant. I don't have to change the tapes until every hour or whatever. So that was the problem with the tape. Lovely, beautiful sound. But the problem was like of reloading and taking out, and you had to like look after all and make sure it's all now down on a little card, and there you go. And with the visuals, there's no syncing up. That's the tape that had to be synced up with the visuals on the Steinbeck machine. So, although it was great, but they were a producer's nightmare. Whereas now, you just hard drive, depends on what gigabyte you have on the hard drive. You could go for a week without even reloading, you know? So that's the difference. There's the difference.
Could you tell me a bit about the TV sound department, how that has changed over the years in regards to the task undertaken by the sound engineers?
Yeah, well, there have been big changes. When I joined in 1968, the structure was very simple. There were 3 grades. There was an operator at the bottom, there was a kind of a junior supervisor, and then there were the senior supervisors. That changed over the years at different rates, and what we have now ended up with is we've got, I should say too, that when I joined in 68 and for 10 years thereafter, there was no such thing as monitors for music in studios. People just had to sing without hearing their own voice fed back to them. There was no such thing as in-ears, but certainly no monitor wedges on the floor. So that was a job that had to be done. And also the PA system for the audience has developed a lot from the early days. Initially, the sound supervisor, as well as mixing sound for the TV listener at home, also had to do the PA mixing from the same desk and the monitor mixing as it evolved from the same desk. So we'd be doing essentially 3 different mixes at the same time. And it turned out that wasn't really satisfactory for anyone, particularly not the sound supervisor, because he was at a disadvantage because he, as well as doing the main mix for the TV viewers, he had to keep switching his monitoring to listen to the PA to hear what the audience were hearing, and also switch to listen to what the artists were hearing. And that wasn't very satisfactory. So what happened was the situation changed so that we brought in quite a sophisticated sound mixing desk into the bigger studios as required. And a dedicated man there did the PA mixing for the audience and the foldback for the artists and for their in-ears and so on. And that's been happening now for the last 15, 20 years, and it's working very well. And it's what visiting artists expect. They expect to be able to hear their own mix in their own monitor. So if there are 6 people performing on the stage, each of them will have a different mix in his monitor, and they can talk to our PA guy on the floor as to exactly what they want to have on that, and he'll listen across what they're getting and satisfy himself that it should be okay for them, as well as looking after sound for the audience. So the sound supervisor in the control room just purely has to listen to and work on what the TV audience is hearing.
The way the TV sound and radio sound departments have changed over the years regarding the tasks carried out by engineers. I suppose back in the day, sound engineers are called engineers because they used to be electrical engineers. So they used to change valves and transistors and solder things and take machines apart and put them together again. So when you see footage from the 50s and 60s, they're wearing lab coats, and they were engineers. But maybe in the 60s, people like George Martin, who's a musician, who then came into the studios and got his hands on the faders. That started to become the norm then. The producers who had their hands on the desk would be musicians who understood a bit about technology, as opposed to electrical engineers who knew a little bit about music. So I suppose over the years, the tasks have evolved into a more creative area compared to the more technical side. So although sound engineering is a balance of both the creative and the technical, the lab coats were kind of replaced by leather jackets, I suppose.
I think, particularly when you talk about television sound in particular, if you look at, say, radio, where the sound is king, where that is the primary concern. Once you get into TV, it's a visual medium, and you're always serving the show. So from the point of view of sound, there's always going to be some compromise there, because you need to serve the program. In the end of the day, you've kind of got you're sort of double facing in that regard. You're trying to capture the best possible sound you can under the circumstances of a television program, which won't be the same as the circumstances of a live show, or won't be the same as a radio program.
With radio, of course, as you touched on, Andy, they have the key benefit of not being envisioned. So, and that is something for us that we have to bear in mind in TV anyway, because everything obviously is in vision. But with radio, for example, when recording or having a live band in, they can have screens in front of them, they can have headphones for their own monitoring. There's no spill as such. It's very much a closed environment, whereas at TV, you can't have that sort of thing, obviously. And you're also dealing with the live audience of up to 200 people. You've got crew working around, you've fold back with the band themselves, the levels could be up, down, that sort of thing. You've the health and safety aspect as well, where you can't go beyond certain levels and keep them within a certain scale over various periods of time. So it's very challenging at the moment. I mean, the example we would always use as well, we get live bands in from time to time, and they'll let you, who are playing fully live, and we are expected, well, not expected, maybe a bit hard on ourselves, but we try to capture the best audio we can, close enough, bearing in mind this band might have just released an album. They might have recorded it over maybe 6 to 12 month period, all individually, multi-tracked, mixed down, the whole lot. And they come in and play live for us, and we have to try and
recreate that within maybe half an hour. Yeah,
you know, so yeah. And live audience there as well, and bearing in mind that the audience need to hear them as well as a transmission. So I think the challenges are certainly there. You know,
and I think okay, certainly it might just relate to us, but we've taken on the role of VT operator as well. So that's another element that we have to kind of factor in. So the playing in of inserts into programs and things like that, and recording the shows. So it's a good thing in a way, because we certainly know a lot more about the formats and the, well, I suppose basic video editing. You know, we're not video editors, but we've taken on the role in our TV sound department of doing that as well. So that's certainly changed in the last, I don't know, perhaps 20 years anyway.
How is computer advancements such as digital recording, sound editing software improved the workflow compared to the days of analog, say?
From my own perspective, because I would do a lot of post-production work myself, and I started out in music, so I would have a lot of empathy towards analog because of that richness of sound. But the process on the digital scale of things is far better. I mean, I can fly through any project now, like, at ease through the whole digital process. And the computer has been a big help in that process, because it's all there. Everything is there in front of you on a screen. You can actually see the waveform from the soundness of it. And I can nearly even see what's being said through the waveform without even listening to it. I know the edit points just from even the spikes on the waveform. The digital format is a godsend. For me, it's great, because, like, you're always on time pressures of budgets again. Your client, there's a deadline, the whole lot. So the digital process is a far faster medium to get it out there and for the workflow.
How has the microphones you use today changed compared to the earlier days?
Well, not surprisingly, they've all got better. But I would have to say that the mics that we started off with in RTE were top of the range at the time. And some of them, in fact, are still in use today. Things like an AKG D20, which is good on a kick drum. It was good in the 60s, and it's still good on a kick drum, if you can find one. And we have a few still in RTE. And there was quite a good range of mics for the time when I joined in '68. But over the years, we've got, microphone manufacturers have been producing better and better mics with better frequency response and, just as importantly, better off-axis response. And RTE has bought them as required, and we have a nice stock of very good microphones now. And of course, one of the biggest change in relation to microphones is radio mics, which simply didn't exist when I joined in '68. And they did, luckily enough. We had been using them for a few years when in 1988 I mixed the sound for the Eurovision Song Contest. And all of the mics on stage then were radio mics, which would have been absolutely unheard of just 2 or 3 years before that. So radio mics and the reliability of them now is a very, very big change from how it was. It's made a big difference to how TV producers can plan their programs, knowing that we can mic pretty well anyone, anywhere with radio mics. It's just a question of having enough of them working without compromising each other and not causing any interference to each other. And RT have been very lucky in that we have very good relations with Sennheiser, and they are the microphone manufacturer that we use and have used almost exclusively since we started using radio mics, and they give tremendous support and advice on installation.
I'll give you a perfect example of it. I was doing a show recently that had excerpts from an interview Pat Kenny did with Veronica Gearin years ago. And what we have now are, it's a shame I don't have any with me. They're basically, what we use is an ME36, Sennheiser ME36. It's a small, real dainty, beautiful little mic. It's on a gooseneck. And we generally put little holes in the desk and we slide them up, and we use them as backups now. We use clips now, and you can even see the clips now are far smaller to what they used to be. Like, they used to be things this size, like, you know. But the backup mics. On this bit of footage I see in this interview that Pat Kenny did with Veronica Gearin, they were sitting kind of almost like, you know, corner to corner. And in between them, there was this stand that came up with 2 mics coming off it. The mics were that long. That long, like, do you know what I mean? Big, huge, intrusive things that you could see almost like a baseball bat coming up out of the ground, you know. Nowadays, the ones we have, like, you know, we don't even need to use them. We just, like, I use them on Pat Kenny. I use them on the 7 o'clock show. Like, you could go and put 2 mics on somebody. You know, I mean, we have enough radio mics in there to go in and put double clip everyone, you know. But the problem is that there's 2 mics, but it's on 1 clip. If the clip falls off, you've still lost both mics. So whereas if you put 1 clip on and you have a tabletop mic or a, you know, a couch mic beside them or something, it means that you have something you can go to even if that mic falls off, you know. But size-wise, I mean, that's basically, it's not just size, clarity as well. Like, they have got far cleaner. When I first started here, we used an AKG 747 as a tabletop mic. Lovely little microphone. I actually mostly preferred them for recording acoustic instruments. Really nice. But they were our backup mics. But the quality difference between them and these new ME36s is phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. I would be quite happy to mix a show entirely on ME36s because I believe I get the audio that I would get will be of sufficient quality to broadcast. A 747 I wouldn't. I would use a 747 until I could get something else in. So get us to an ad break with the 747. Just get to the ad break, go in, change the mic, and work from there. But yeah, the difference is phenomenal. The quality is phenomenal.
The microphones have changed. Not a great deal because, like I would still use the original mics that I have, you know, and they do the work for me. There is a lot of new mics on the market, lighter mics and stuff like that. And again, that's down to like the sound engineer, like how he designs his own setup and stuff like that. So it's not a big heavy deal with the gear. That it's not like cumbersome or, you know. But the microphones have, particularly on the boards, on the boards inside the mic, it's all down to like micro technology now, you know, and they have it can be cleaner and stuff like that. But again, I prefer my old mics because it has that richness of sound, and I prefer that. The microphones haven't done a lot of big jumps, you know, because they've pretty much stayed the same. A lot of guys that I know, like sound guys, would still have their original mics, and would bought like one or two. Like you'd always have a collection of mics. Like I have about 10 mics and stuff like that. So you'd always have, because every mic has its own characteristics and stuff like that. But the microphones, again, are important in getting good sound, because you could buy a 10 euro microphone, and you could buy a $2,000 microphone. Which microphone would you think is the better, you know? But the microphones have changed, but the characteristics are pretty much the same too.
Technologically, there are a lot of things that have just refined as opposed to become new things when condenser mics go way back. But the way that particularly artists get their foldback, rather than having a monitor in front of them, a lot of them go for in-ear monitoring now, which is wireless. So they'll have a wireless pack on the back, and they'll be taking their mix into their ears, which means there's no spill. So
stage levels can get very quiet.
And that gives you an opportunity to use microphones on vocals and also on instruments that perhaps you wouldn't have before, because you were worried about the level of spill on the floor and what that would do from a feedback point of view.
Absolutely.
So
I think placement is key. Placement is everything, basically, regardless of what duty you're doing. Let's say from an operator's point of view, if you're clipping a radio mic onto someone, it's all about placement and where you put it. If you're swinging a boom on a drama, it's all about placement, where you get the mic. If you're miking up an instrument, miking up a band, it's all about placement. Everything is about placement. Obviously, mic choice comes into it as well, but I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, I think there has been advances, like certainly wireless is a relatively new thing. It's been around for a long time, since the 80s anyway, but relatively speaking, it's a new thing. So that's certainly a change.
Yes.
And certainly wireless technology has advanced quite a lot. We've now got digital wireless now, which is basically the kind of the pinnacle of it at the moment, I think.
Yeah.
Really.
It has, and I mean, it's nearly expected now with every artist, band or presenter comes in, that they expect that they're going to be wireless as well. Particularly presenters with some of the light entertainment shows that we do. I mean, if you were to approach them with a cabled mic nowadays,
absolutely,
they'd think it's either a joke or, you know, what's the problem?
And it creates a lot of freedom as well for presenters to maybe walk around the studio, or for an artist to wander around the stage.
It's just total freedom and flexibility to move around.
And even things like wireless guitar packs and things like that. So even instrument level, not necessarily a microphone, but it enables just people not to be tethered down, and they can wander around, and it creates kind of different environments that make the visual aspect a bit more interesting, I suppose. That people aren't just tethered to one spot, and it's not just a static thing, you know. It creates a bit more of an interesting visual element, I suppose.
And even within wireless as well, as to how the equipment itself is getting smaller and smaller in size now as well, and even battery life has been extended, all that sort of thing, compared to maybe 10, 15 years ago.
Absolutely,
where we would have been using up to 3 AA's, say, in a radio pack to give us 6 hours max, 5-6 hours if we were lucky. But nowadays we can get one AA will give us up to 6 to 8 sort of thing. You know, so the technology is constantly changing, and it certainly helps all aspects. You know?
I think in that aspect, I think wireless is definitely one of the biggest changes, and that's making the most kind of advances. Yeah.
What are the greatest challenges that your profession faces today compared to the days of analog?
It would be pretty much harping back to your earlier question. The problem now, I would say, is maintaining standards. Maintaining the standard of sound on when programs are done on a very tight budget, which means a very tight time schedule. Usually simply not enough time to get a job done properly, but it just has to be coped with as best the sound department can. Time is the big enemy, and maintaining the standards when we have not a lot of time for rehearsal, for sound checks, that's the big challenge. Knowing that the listener, as I said earlier, is much more demanding as to the quality that they hear. They expect the best of quality. And in fact, one advantage that we have in a strange way is being in the same geographical area as the BBC and ITV. BBC in particular are acknowledged as world leaders in broadcast. And we're aware that we're up against them and we have to maintain our standards against them. So the presence of BBC on cable or on aerial in the earlier days has always been a great incentive for RT to keep their standard up and match the best that BBC can produce, at least from a technical point of view. And I think we've managed to do that very well.
The challenges that we face now in the digital age is that technology is moving at a much faster pace than it was. Technology, it's like all the digital stuff, it's all computer based. It changes year on year. So one of the main challenges is keeping on top of that and keeping fluent in the tools that we use and knowing the possibilities of what can be achieved. There's a lot of compromise then as well in certainly in television when it comes to sound, that you're not always able to maybe put things where you want them or get things sounding exactly how you want them due to maybe time restrictions or the restrictions placed on you by the shot, the camera shotter. I think that there are certainly challenges that those sort of challenges have been around since the days of analog as well, I suppose, but they're still very much there. And
and certainly with the digital, like all things, it has its pros and its cons as well. The pros, I think, certainly outweigh the cons. There's no doubt about it.
By far, I would say,
speed, access, all that sort of thing, and the cons being, at the end of the day, we are at the mercy of the equipment as well. The vast majority of stuff is computer driven or software driven as well. And touch wood, we haven't had too many issues like that, but you could get into some serious issues. Now, as I said, we always have standbys and other bits of equipment standing by and so on, or standby desks, all that sort of thing. But, if something does go wrong, it mightn't be as easy to overcome or to repair or to fix as it would have been in the analog,
absolutely. In the analog days, I suppose. I mean, certainly being able to service equipment in the field, there and then, you might be able to fix something there and then. But if it might be a software issue or it might be something computer based, you might not be able to repair or whatever or fix the problem.
And I know a lot of the companies nowadays, certainly a few of the companies we deal with as well, they're starting to overcome a lot of that as well, where with all our on-air transmission desks now, even if our PC element does go down or we lose it completely, audio will still pass through the desk. So there is that safety element there, which is a good thing, because up to maybe 10, 12 years ago, with the first few analog or digital desks when they were coming through, they were solely reliant on the PC end of things. And if your PC went down, so did your desk, and you lost all audio.
That's the thing with digital as well. It kind of either works or it doesn't. With analog, I mean, there can be certainly times where things might be slightly degraded, but I think with digital, it's either there or it's not. So I think they're certainly big challenges that we face these days.
What are the greatest challenges the profession has to deal with today? Shit audio, right? And that's an honest answer. Increasingly, the role of the sound recordist is disappearing. You've got guys like your mate here who come in with his camera and take a radio mic and a set of headphones and does it all himself. Do you know what I mean? Our camera guys here do it all the time. Like 90% of the work they do it without a sound recordist. It can mean a world of difference. An absolute world of difference. Because a lot of the time, it needs somebody with a trained ear to notice the little things that are going to be problematic. For example, everything we send out here has to be loudness compliant. So it has to, has to have a certain level. It can't be, you know, overly loud, or it'll basically what'll happen is that the end of the line limiter, if you like, it's a very basic term. It's not really a limiter, but that will just bring the level down and just make it lower so that it's compliant. So where a cameraman will go, and no offense, camera guy will look and go, we'll put her down beside the waterfall there. That'll be a lovely shot, and we'll do the interview there. And he puts on the headphones, and yeah, you can hear the water in the background, but he can hear her as well. But he's also listening to the interviewee or the interviewer at the same time. So she's a bit softly spoken, but I can hear her. She's fine. Okay, grand, fine. Bring it back in here. See what the level looks like on a meter. Suddenly you have to put 10 dB again across a mic in order to get her that she's compliant, so that you can actually hear her at a normal level. But what else are you doing? You're putting 10 dB again across that bloody waterfall in the background as well. And suddenly something that you thought, we'll get away with that, you're kind of going, you're not getting away with that. and stuff ends up on the cutting room floor. And also stuff doesn't end up in the cutting room floor, which really, really, as Peter Griffin would say, grinds my gears. Like, it's just shit, no, it has to stay in. No, it doesn't have to stay in. Chop it out, find something better, fill your hole with that. That's not broadcast audio. It's not broadcast quality. We shouldn't be putting stuff out like that. The boss man says it has to go out. It goes out.
How has OB's outside broadcast changed since the days of analog?
So outside broadcasts have changed massively since analog days. And again, it's the amount of equipment required, the sheer size and weight of the equipment. For example, we do the Christmas carol services from St. Patrick's Cathedral every year. And even when I started doing it about 10 years ago, we would have used a multi-core cable this size, which carried 7 channels. So we would have had to run those the length of the cathedral, 2 of them, because we had around about 11 or 12 channels, not that many. So we would have had to run 2 of those really long, heavy cables, the length of the cathedral, over the top of lights, in through doors, and you couldn't close the doors then for a week because we had to rig it the week before. Nowadays, you can have 512 channels of audio on a single Cat5 cable. So we put a box at one end of the cathedral, and we've already run the Cat5, and because Cat5 is so cheap, we don't have to put those cables in and take them out every year. We just leave it in because it doesn't cost anything. So you can leave it in there all year and just take the end out, plug it into the box, and then at the far end of the cathedral, up in the little room that we use, we plug it into the desk, and hey presto, you've got as many channels as you want.
Outside broadcasting and television, compared to the analog sound, again, it's down to the digital, because they would use on OB units out in location, because they now use satellite dishes. They kind of beam up to kind of a satellite to drop it down live, into the studio, and, so it's a whole digital thing. You have one cable now where the sound and vision goes down a cable into the satellite dish, and it beams it out. So there's no real. It's actually made it easier. It was harder years ago to do that. In the analog days, the comparison was that to do an important, say, for example, a news story of something that's gone on, something has happened, whether it was like explosions or wars or whatever like that, you had to rely on just even typed stuff like faxes, because you couldn't send a physical tape like straight away to the 6 o'clock for the 6 o'clock news that evening. So it was harder then. You nearly had to wait for 2 or 3 days before you could do that news report. So the information would have been sent by either fax, or telephone, and even before fax, because fax itself was a modern format as well. But say like in the 50s or whatever like that, in the early 50s or even before that, it would have been after being a phone call, or some sort of way of getting the information to the studios. The studios would impart the information just purely from a typewritten, but the actual rushes like the visuals and the sound had to be kind of sent or waited till the sound crew got back and then put through the process.
How has post-production, audio post-production changed again since the days of analog?
So post-production has changed a lot since the days of analog. Nowadays, it's all done in a computer, giving you a higher track count and lots of options. Later in this, at later stages, you're left with more choices. In analog days, you made your decisions and you stuck to them because you were working largely with analog tape, bouncing from one track to another. And so when you recorded a voiceover onto one track of a tape machine, and leaving the other track with just Atmos on it, you were essentially destroying that track. So if you made a mistake, you had to just go back and drop in earlier. So that meant that when you had recorded your voice, that was it. It was recorded. You couldn't affect the balance, which now you can afterwards. So it's just a different workflow where you're making your decisions earlier and sticking to them, as opposed to leaving yourself with 100 decisions at the end of the process in the digital land.
Post-production has changed an awful lot from the days of analog, because again, the machinery that was used in post-production has all changed regarding of all that. Everything's now on a hard drive. You go into any of the studios that would have been here from the days of analog, and they have a huge basement with all this footage and stuff like that and all, and it takes up room. Whereas now you can have millions and millions of information now, whether it be on SoundCloud or whether it be on a hard drive, on storage, in the post-production house. So again, it's a quantum leap, It was a quantum leap for better. It's a much faster process. It's a much faster process with the digital.
One thing that I think is quite relevant is that we can get maybe sidetracked a little bit in talking about analog and digital. The most important piece of monitoring equipment we have is our ears. Always has been, always will be. And it's a question of using them to the fullest and looking after them too, of course. But our ears are the most important monitoring device we have. So whether it's analog or digital, it all comes down to our ears at the end of the day.
I suppose a general overview, it's certainly a challenging industry. It's very enjoyable as well. I
think as you were saying, a desk only does three things. It takes sound in, it manipulates sound, it sends sound on, and it's just, these are advancements in doing that same thing and refining what you can do with it, and it's really kind of the art of what's possible.
Yeah.
That it's just making
and
things more possible with less.
That's it. And when stuff becomes quicker, you're able to achieve more in that time. Okay, obviously you can override the pudding, but you can generally get a better product these days in a lesser amount of time.
Yeah.